Welcome everyone to the Joel Martin Mastery Podcast. I'm a networking expert and the author of the upcoming book, No Strangers, How to Build Community, One Relationship at a Time. My why is the pursuit of mastery, and the goal of this podcast is to lock arms on a lifelong mission of daily personal growth to become the best version of ourselves. So let's dive in to today's episode. Welcome, everyone, to today's episode of the podcast where I'm sharing the top 10 books that I read in 2021. So every year I try to read at least 70 books. Last year I read 72. If you are watching this episode, then you can see the covers for the 72 books on screen now. And if you are listening to this episode, I'll put a link in the description so you can click and see what those 72 books were. So this is not a list of the 10 best books released in 2021. It's the best books that I read in 2021, and I'm sharing them in the order in which I read them. The first great book that I read in 2021 was Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. So I wanted to start off the year with a challenge. And this book was definitely a challenge, clocking in at over 1,100 pages. It's not an easy read, but I really wanted something that I could sink my teeth into. And this book came to my attention because of Tim Ferriss. So on his podcast, he interviews all these amazing individuals, and he always asks them what their favorite books are. And this is the book that showed up the most in their answers. So I was familiar with her other book, Anthem. It's one of my favorites. I've read it several times. You should check that one out as well. And that gave me the confidence that this would be worth the time and energy it would take to get through 1,100 pages. So the book, it depicts a dystopian United States in which private businesses suffer under increasingly burdensome laws and regulations. And as I'm reading this book, I just couldn't fathom how a human being could have written it. It is long, it is complex, and the writing is masterful. I actually was highlighting throughout the book, and there were probably 10 different quotes that I thought were just incredible that I ended up sharing on my social media. So if you're looking for a challenge, this one is for you. The second great book that I read in 2021 was Beyond Order by Jordan Peterson. So his other book, 12 Rules for Life, is one of the best-selling books of all time by a Canadian author. So if you love that book, you'll love this book, which is The Next 12 Rules. So he's a controversial figure. He rubs some people the wrong way. However, his work has been a blessing in my life. I mean, his books, his podcast, his interviews, his videos, his lectures, all that stuff has had a very positive influence on me over the last few years. You can see behind me, I have a poster of his that I created with one of my favorite quotes. And he's widely considered one of the top intellectuals in the world. And I mean, almost no one else can go on tour, just him alone on stage, talking for several hours, and he sees hundreds of thousands of people around the world. So I actually just grabbed a ticket. He just announced the Canadian leg of that tour, and no Ottawa date. Montreal sold out instantly, so I will be going to Hamilton for that one. The third great book that I read in 2021 was The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. And that's one of the greatest book titles of all time. It's a play on words from the famous book, The Art of War. And the book highlights the forms of resistance faced by artists, entrepreneurs, athletes, and others who are trying to break through creative barriers. So if you're creative in any way, you have to read this book, as well as his other book, Turning Pro. The fourth great book that I read in 2021 was Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain. So I'm almost ashamed to say that I wasn't really familiar with him until after he passed away. I mean, I was aware of him. I knew he was a chef and that he traveled the world with his TV show. And also many of my intelligent friends were fans of his and talked about him all the time. And it was just recently that I watched a couple seasons of Parts Unknown, and I could see why he was so captivating and why people loved him so much. So this book came out when he was a broke chef And he showed the underbelly of the restaurant world. He brought to light things that were shocking and unknown back then, but are now common knowledge because of his book. And, the book made him rich and famous. And he's an excellent writer. And this is a highly entertaining book. The fifth great book that I read in 2021 was The Almanack of Naval Ravikant by Eric Jorgensen. So I did a full book review for this one back on episode 36 of the podcast. So you want to go check that out. And a quick summary is that Naval Ravikant is an angel investor who made a fortune with some of the biggest tech startups. Then a few years ago, he did a tweet storm sharing a ton of knowledge on wealth building and success that went viral. They then turned that tweet storm into a 3.5-hour audio, and that audio blew my mind. I listened to that many times. And then Eric Jorgensen took those tweets and took that audio and expanded it into this book. So it's got a ton of life-changing advice, and the book is actually available for free online. So you want to go check that out. The sixth great book that I read in 2021 was All the Light We Cannot See by Anthony Doerr. So I kept seeing this book on the best of list for the last several years now, and any book that wins a Pulitzer Prize definitely has my attention. So the story is set in France back during World War II, and it centers on a blind French girl and a German boy whose paths cross eventually. So I was hooked. I absolutely love both of the main characters. The book hooked me at the start. I kind of had to plow through it a little bit in the middle, but then it hooked me again at the end. And it's the kind of story that sticks with you for a long time. So this is another one of those books where I can't fathom that a single human being was able to come up with this story and write this book. It's just so in depth, it's so intricate, and it's so well fleshed out. So it blows my mind. So check it out. The seventh great book that I read in 2021 was Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. So this is a memoir by Nike co-founder Phil Knight, and it chronicles the history of Nike from its founding and its early challenges to its evolution into one of the world's most recognized and profitable companies. So if you're an entrepreneur wanting to know what it takes to build $1 billion company, you have to read this book, and you have to come to terms with whether you're willing to make those kind of sacrifices or not. And it's nuts, man. Despite the company making millions or hundreds of millions or billions of dollars over its history, on a daily basis, it was facing challenges that could have easily wiped it out. And it was actually on the brink of bankruptcy for decades. The eighth great book that I read in 2021 was Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. So if you liked his other book, Sapiens, you'll like this book as well. Sapiens covered the history of humankind, and this one speculates on what our future might look like. So for all of human history, our time has been consumed with trying to survive against famine, war, and disease. With all three of those having mostly been eradicated, humans will have to find something new to fill our time. He speculates that we will now focus on achieving happiness, immortality, and godlike powers. This was a really eye-opening read. The ninth great book that I read in 2021 was How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan. The subtitle of the book is What the New Science of Psychedelics Teaches Us About Consciousness, Dying, Addiction, Depression, and Transcendence. So he's a journalist who really dives into the topics he's researching. So when he was researching psychedelics, he actually tried them himself, and he shares his experience. The current research is showing incredible results, helping those with depression, helping addicts quit using drugs. It's really helping those with terminal cancer to gain acceptance and peace with their diagnosis. This is really eye-opening, and it's really fascinating stuff. The 10th and final great book that I read in 2021 was Educated by Tara Westover. So this is one of the craziest and unbelievable true stories I've ever heard. And she recounts overcoming her survivalist Mormon family in order to go to college. And she really emphasizes the importance of education in enlarging her world. She details her journey from her isolated life in the mountains of Idaho to completing a PhD program in history at Cambridge University. And she started college at the age of just 17. Having had no formal education. So those were the best books that I read last year. I hope that you enjoy them as well. How many books did you read last year? How many books are you going to read this year? And which books should I be checking out? Please reach out to me on social media and let me know what to add to my reading list. So thanks for checking out this episode, and we'll see you on the next one. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode, and I'd love to hear from you guys. My goal is to grow this podcast organically, where you're giving me feedback on topics you'd like me to cover and guests you'd like me to interview. You can reach out to me on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Joel Martin Mastery. Joel is Joel, and on Twitter at Joel Mastery. So I am done. I am complete. I approve this message, and I'll see you on the next episode.